His hand closed around her throat in a five-star lobby. He leaned in and switched to Russian, a language he was certain she didn't speak, and made his threat. Deportation, disappearance, or worse, she was undocumented. She had no power. There was nothing she could do. She replied in perfect Russian, not broken Russian, not panicked Russian, aristocratic, ice-cold Russian that stopped him mid-breath. What happened next wasn't softness. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something far more dangerous. A man who had never once had to earn anything beginning to understand, for the first time, that there was one woman in Seoul he could not simply take. But there's something about why she was there, something about her father, that neither of them saw coming. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into it. The lobby of Hotel Yeonhwa smelled like nothing. That was intentional. The white peonies on every surface had been chosen specifically because they held no scent. Scent made people remember. In this hotel, memory was the one thing not included in the rate. Zola Vance had worked the concierge desk for 3 years. She knew every guest by what they didn't say. She knew every corner of the building by which exit it offered. She was wearing her charcoal blazer. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her lips were neutral gloss. Her eyes registered everything. She was undocumented. She had been for 2 years. The hotel owner, Park Tae-soo, had discovered this 8 months in. And instead of reporting her, he'd done the math. A concierge who couldn't leave. A concierge who couldn't complain. A concierge who would never, under any circumstances, talk about what happened on the upper floors. She had accepted this. Not with defeat. With calculation. Every month, she moved money. Small amounts. Tips. Undeclared bonuses. Payments from guests who valued her silence. Into an account under a name that didn't belong to her. She was building a door out of that hotel. Brick by brick. In total silence. She was checking a room transfer on her screen when the lobby doors opened. The 2 junior staff behind her took a half step back. They didn't know why. Their bodies knew before their minds did. Kwon Do-yoon walked in like weather. He was tall. His suit was black. His shirt was black. The only color on him was the silver of a watch on his left wrist and the cold, precise anger in his eyes. 2 men flanked him like punctuation marks. He crossed the marble floor without looking at anything that wasn't a threat. His eyes found Zola. He didn't stop walking. He reached the desk. His hand came over the counter, and it closed around her throat. Not choking. Not yet. But the grip was real. Firm. The kind of grip that says, I have made a decision about you. Zola didn't reach for the panic button. She didn't gasp. She looked at him. Steadily. The way a woman looks at something dangerous when she has already decided she isn't going to run from it. He leaned in close, and he switched to Russian. Low. Guttural. Vladivostok Russian. Hard consonants. Compressed vowels. The Russian of someone who hadn't learned it in a classroom. You work the desk, he said in Russian. Someone in this building has been leaking information that belongs to me. You're going to tell me who, or I make one call and you're in a deportation cell before midnight. You don't exist on paper. Nobody will look. Nobody will find you. He waited for the crack, the flinch, the wide eyes. She breathed slowly against the pressure of his hand, and then she answered him, in Russian. Not just any Russian. Aristocratic Russian, Petersburg Russian, the kind that belonged in embassies and opera houses, not in a hotel lobby, not from the throat of a black woman in a charcoal blazer in Seoul. Perfect consonants, exact inflection, not one hesitation. Your paranoia is showing, Do-yoon, she said. If I were a spy, you'd already be dead. You'd have been dead before you reached the elevator. Now let go of my throat, before I call the embassy you're so afraid of. Silence. His grip didn't loosen right away. Something moved across his face, a sequence of adjustments. the look of a man who has just received information his instruments told him was impossible. Slowly, his hand came away. He stepped back. Zola lowered her chin. She straightened her blazer collar with 2 fingers. Slowly, deliberately. Her eyes didn't leave his face. He said nothing. He just looked at her. And she felt, for the first time in 3 years behind that desk, the specific discomfort of being completely seen. Here is what she didn't know yet. That the moment he let go of her throat was not the end of something. It was the beginning of something far more difficult to escape. The next morning, Park Tae-soo called her into his office. He was sweating through his collar before she sat down. He explained carefully that Kwon Do-yoon had made an arrangement, that Zola would be reassigned, temporarily, to provide personal translation for an upcoming negotiation, that the hotel would be compensated, that this was, of course, entirely her choice. He couldn't look at her on that last part. She sat with her hands folded. She let the silence go long enough to hurt. Then she said, "Of course." Because what else was there? 3 days later, she arrived at an address in Yongsan, a private townhouse that told you nothing from the street. She was shown to a small room and told to wait. The chairs were expensive. The walls had no art. The kind of space designed to make you feel the power of whoever owned it before they even walked in. Do-yoon arrived 12 minutes late. He handed her a folder. He didn't greet her. "Russian delegation," he said in Korean. 4 men. Lead is a man named Mikhail Orlov. They arrive tonight. I need everything translated, everything. Not summaries, every word. Zola opened the folder. Shipping manifests, port access numbers, documents dressed up as logistics that were clearly something else entirely. She closed the folder. "I understand," she said. In formal Korean, every word the correct distance. He watched her the whole time she read. She felt it, like a temperature change. "You're not going to ask questions," he said. "Should I?" He said nothing. "Then no," Zola said. "I'm not going to ask questions. I'm going to translate. That's what you purchased." Something moved in his face on that word. Purchased. She had chosen it deliberately. He knew. The meeting with Mikhail Orlov happened that evening. Orlov was wide through the shoulders, wide through the jaw. He had pale eyes that measured everything in the room as either useful or disposable. When he walked in and saw Zola standing beside Do-yoon, those pale eyes did something specific. They decided something about her. "A black woman translator," Orlov said, in Russian, without lowering his voice. "Interesting decoration." Zola translated this into Korean for Do-yoon, without inflection, without blinking. Do-yoon's jaw tightened. He said nothing. For 3 hours, Zola moved through the negotiation like a blade. She translated not just the words, but the weight behind them. The pauses, the redirections. The moments when Orlov switched to informal Russian to speak to his men, conversations he assumed she'd miss. She missed nothing. At the end of the first session, Orlov leaned back in his chair. He said something to the man beside him, casual, like she wasn't in the room. "She's quite good. A woman like that would be very useful in Vladivostok. More useful than here. Include her in the secondary terms. A bonus from the Korean." Zola translated this into Korean. Flat. Professional. Every word. "He's suggesting," she said, "that I be included as a secondary asset in the arrangement. A personal transfer to his organization." The room went completely still. Do-yoon didn't move. His expression didn't change. But something in the air changed. The particular stillness of a man deciding something very quickly. Then, in Russian, cold, correct, unexpected Russian, Do-yoon looked at Orlov and said, "She's not on the table, now or ever. Say it again and we're done. You'll find another port." Orlov's pale eyes moved between them. He laughed. A small, surrendering laugh. "Of course," he said. "Forgive me." Later, walking to the car, Zola was aware of something new. Not warmth. Nothing as simple as that. More like the feeling of walking past a building 100 times and suddenly noticing it was never ordinary. She filed the feeling away. She had a door to finish building. Over the next 2 weeks, she moved through Do-yoon's world like she moved through languages, cleanly, leaving nothing behind. She translated 3 more meetings. She attended dinners where she was the only woman in rooms full of men who wore their power like weapons. She decoded not just words, but strategy. Who deferred to whom? Which sentences were true? Which were theater? Do-yoon began including her in briefings she hadn't been called to. He started asking, after meetings, not just what had been said, but what she'd felt about it. What was underneath the words? Where the real pressure was? And despite herself, she answered, with the same precision she brought to everything. One night, they sat in the back of his car in silence while Seoul moved past the windows in neon. He spoke without looking at her. Where did you learn Russian like that? She had been waiting for this question. My father, she said. Nigerian? Half. His mother was from Lagos. He spent 12 years in Russia, Vladivostok, then Moscow. Do-yoon went still beside her. Not the stillness of casual listening. Something else. The stillness of a man whose body has received information his mind hasn't caught up to yet. His name, he said, quietly. Adebayo Vance, she said, though in Russia they gave him a different name, the one from Vladivostok. She heard him exhale, slow, controlled. He taught me, Do-yoon said, in the prison. She turned and looked at him fully for the first time since getting in the car. I know, she said. The city moved past. Neither of them spoke. He talked about you, Do-yoon said finally. He called you his ghost. He said you moved through languages the way other people moved through rooms, that you were never lost anywhere. Because language was your home. Something tightened in Zola's chest. He never came back, she said. Not an accusation. A fact that had had enough time to lose its edges. I know. He died in that prison, 6 months after I was released. Do-yoon paused. The debt I owe him. It was always meant to find its way to you. I tracked your family for 4 years. Lagos, London, and then Seoul. And instead of paying the debt, she said, you grabbed me by the throat. The words fell between them. He said nothing for a long moment. Yes, he said. One word. The closest she would hear to an apology from him for a very long time. She looked back out the window. She told herself the tightening in her chest was just the cold air from the vents. But here's the thing about a cage. Sometimes it takes a while before you see the bars. It was her contact who finally showed her. The one she'd been using to quietly rebuild her documents. The process had been moving for 4 months. But when she followed up, the answer came back with an apology. The application had been blocked. Not denied. Blocked. Specifically. From inside the immigration office's filing system. She knew who. She didn't confront him immediately. She watched first. She paid attention to details she'd been too distracted to notice. Park Tae-soo had been quietly removed from her daily management. Her accommodation had been moved, for convenience, to a residence connected to Do-yoon's network. The small freedoms she'd built so carefully, one by one, had been absorbed into an arrangement she'd never signed. He hadn't kidnapped her. He'd just made it impossible to leave. The difference was technical. In practice, it felt identical. She found him on a Tuesday morning. He was at a desk in the Yongsan townhouse, reading documents. She walked in. She closed the door. She stood in front of him with her hands at her sides. My documentation, she said. In Korean. Formal Korean. The Korean of court filings. It was blocked. By someone with access to immigration systems. I need you to unblock it. He looked up. It's a complicated process, he said. These things take time. You made it complicated, she said. He said nothing. You protected me from Orlov, she said. And then you kept me undocumented so I could never walk through an airport. You call one a kindness, but It's the same hand around the same throat, Do-yun. Just different clothes. She turned and left. From that day forward, she spoke to him only in formal Korean. No Russian. She understood exactly what that cost him. The Russian they had begun to share. In the car. In quiet moments after negotiations. In the careful dropping of distances between them. That had been the only real intimacy between them. It was her father's language. It had been Do-yun's inheritance from the man who taught him. Stripping it out wasn't just withdrawal. It was amputation. Do-yun felt it. She could see it in the brief hesitations before he spoke to her. In the way he watched her from across rooms with something new in his face. Not loss, exactly. The thing that comes just before loss. When you can see the drain happening and you know, with total certainty, that you caused it yourself. He didn't fix the documents, but she noticed he stopped adding new obstacles. The cage stayed, but the locks began to change. Then, at 2 a.m, everything shifted. She was awake. She was often awake in those hours, running numbers, tracking the account she'd been building for months. She heard movement in the corridor outside her room. Not security rotation, not hotel staff. Something with purpose. Multiple pairs of feet moving with the specific quiet of people trained to move quietly. She was already dressed. She didn't wait for the knock. She crossed to the window, pulled the curtain back 1 inch. 3 men at the building's entrance, positioned in a formation that had nothing to do with delivery. She had 6 seconds. She went through the window. There was a service structure along the exterior wall. She'd identified it on day 3 in the residence, the same way she'd identified every exit from every space she'd occupied for the past 7 years of her adult life. She was on the street in under a minute. She called Do-yun. He answered on the second ring. Already. Awake. 3 men at the residence, she said. In English, not Korean, not Russian. Neutral ground. There may be more inside. Where are you? Moving east. Don't stop, I'm coming. She didn't stop. He found her 12 minutes later. She got into the back seat. His driver, a quiet man named Jun, who had the energy of someone who'd moved many people away from many things and had no opinions about any of them, pulled into traffic without being told. Your father, Do-yun said. Elder Kwan. He sent them? He's been watching the situation. A pause. He doesn't approve. He didn't say of what. He didn't need to. To Elder Kwan, Zola wasn't a person. She was a variable in an equation that didn't tolerate variables. They drove south, deeper into Seoul, into the parts the tourist maps didn't include. Older neon signs, narrower streets. The smell of rain on asphalt and food stall oil. Do-yun took her to a room above a restaurant. Not a safe house exactly, but a private space that smelled of old wood and soy and had one window looking out over an alley lit by a single orange lamp. They sat across a low table from each other, and the conversation they'd been circling for weeks finally arrived. He'll keep sending people, Zola said. Yes. Until one of them finishes it. Or until I end this first. How? He looked at her. The guilt was there. The complicated debt of her father's memory, and underneath all of it, like bedrock under everything else, something she recognized without wanting to. He was looking at her the way a man looks at someone he has been holding at arm's length for so long that his arms have finally given out. I need to tell you something, he said. Then tell me. I blocked your documents, he said, because I was afraid. Not of what you'd do when you left, but of what I'd go back to when you were gone. He looked at the table. That's not a justification. It's just the truth. I don't have a better version of it. The orange lamp outside the window, the distant sound of the city. Do-yun, she said. He looked up. I know, she said. I know that. And that's part of what makes it unforgivable. He nodded. I know. The silence sat between them. Not empty. Full of something. Then Zola set both hands flat on the table. I've been moving your money, she said, He went completely still. Not stealing, she said. A portion of the digital assets that pass through accounts I have access to through translation work. Small amounts. Untraceable. Into a structure I built. She looked at him steadily. I've been planning my own exit for 2 months. With or without you. He stared at her, and something happened on his face that she had never seen before. Not anger. Not cold calculation. The beginning of something that, on any other man, she would have called a smile. The ghost of one. The thing that comes before a smile when a person has been wound too tightly for too long. You stole from me, he said. I borrowed leverage, she said. It's different. How is it different? A thief takes and runs. I built a contingency. I never planned to disappear with it. I planned to use it to be free. The not-quite smile stayed. Your father, he said quietly, was exactly like this. I know, she said. He told me. Do-yun reached into his jacket. He set something on the table between them. A passport, clean, new, her photograph inside. Korean residence permit, he said. Legal, properly filed, and inside the back page, an account number. The money you moved is still there. Plus, what I added. She didn't touch it. Added? What I owed your father, he said. It was always yours. She looked at the passport on the table. She looked at him. If I pick that up, she said, I can walk out of this room. Out of this city. Tonight. Yes. You won't block it. No. We still have Elder Kwan, she said. And his men. Yes. And someone else, she said. Someone who's been feeding information about your port operations to both sides. She paused. Not your father. Not Orlov. Someone using both of you as pieces in a game. Something sharpened in his eyes. I found it in the documents you had me translate, she said. 3 months of meetings, reviewed together. The same access codes appear in Orlov's communications and in a set of documents I wasn't supposed to see. She said the name quietly. Deputy Commissioner Choi. She watched the change move through him. Tell me everything, he said. She told him everything. What happened next took 36 hours. No weapons, no confrontation. Just Zola, a laptop, and the months of documents she'd been quietly indexing since the day she understood exactly what she was working inside. Choi had been playing both sides for 18 months, feeding the Kwan syndicate intelligence about the Russians, feeding the Russians intelligence about the Kwans, letting them damage each other, waiting to step in and claim the port when both were too weakened to resist. He was intelligent. He had simply miscalculated one thing. He had no idea who was in the room. Zola built a file, time-stamped, authenticated, routed through channels that made it impossible to trace back to any living person. It landed that evening in the inboxes of the National Investigation Service's Anti-Corruption Unit, 3 senior prosecutors, and 2 journalists, whose entire careers were built on exactly this kind of evidence. Elder Kwan's operation, she handled separately, not with force, with 17 documents, carefully filed, that made his position within the Port Authority structurally impossible. He wasn't arrested, not yet. But the walls of everything he'd built were now under examination. He retreated. That was enough. Zola closed the laptop. She felt nothing dramatic about it. Just the clean, settled feeling of a door opening on well-maintained hinges. Her flight was in 4 hours. The storm came off the Yellow Sea as she reached the docks at Incheon. Fast and total, horizontal rain, the kind that erases the horizon and turns every light into a smear. She stood under the covered edge of a dock and watched the water. Her new passport was in the inside pocket of her jacket. Her hair had come loose in the wind. She didn't push it back. She heard him before she saw him. His footsteps on the dock. Measured. Unhurried. He stopped beside her. They both looked at the water. Then he spoke. In Russian. Not the threatening Russian from the lobby. Not the boardroom Russian. Something else. Slower. softer at the edges. The Russian he'd learned from a man named Adebayo Vance in a cold prison at the edge of the world and had carried ever since like a photograph in a coat pocket. "I don't know how to ask for forgiveness," he said. "I haven't had to ask for much in a long time. I've forgotten what it looks like." A pause. "But I'm asking." Zola looked at the black water. "What are you asking to be forgiven for?" she said. In Russian. She hadn't planned to. It arrived the way certain things arrive, not chosen. Inevitable. "The hand at your throat," he said. "The documents. The cage I built while telling myself it was protection." He paused. "For being a man who spent his whole life taking things and calling it earning." A container ship somewhere out in the harbor let out a long, low sound, moving through the dark. "My father would have liked the version of you that exists right now," she said. "In this moment. I'm not sure about the other versions." "Neither am I," he said. She turned and looked at him fully. He was soaked through. His suit was dark with rain. He looked like a man standing in the full weight of something and choosing not to move away from it. "I'm leaving," she said. "I know. I don't know if I'll come back." "I know that too." "You won't try to stop this one." "No." She studied his face, the jaw that was always held, so tight. The eyes she had watched, over weeks, move from cold to calculating to guilty to something she still didn't have a clean word for. He was not a man who had been ruined by his power. He was a man who had been slowly enclosed by it. The way a tree grows around whatever it's pressed against, until it can't remember the shape it might have had. She had cracked that structure. She could see the crack. Right there. In the fact that he was standing in the rain asking for forgiveness instead of issuing an order. She picked up her bag from the dock railing. She walked toward the exit. The dock was long. He didn't follow. She reached the threshold, the place where the dock connected to the terminal corridor, the last step before the way forward. She stopped. She stood in the noise of the storm. The airport was ahead. Lagos was beyond that. Everything after that was open. She thought about her father, a man who had taught a young Korean criminal Russian in a prison at the edge of the world, because it was something kind to do, and because kindness was the one thing her father had never been able to stop doing no matter what surrounded him. She thought about the door she'd been building, brick by brick, in silence, for years. She turned around. Do-yeon was where she'd left him. Still. Watching her. Not moving toward her. Not calling to her. Not making any gesture that would push the decision in any direction. He had given her the passport, the money, his Russian and his guilt, and the most honest thing she'd ever heard from him. Now he was giving her his stillness, the choice entirely hers. She walked back. Not quickly. Not with drama. The way Zola Vance did everything, deliberately. Like every step had been decided in advance and confirmed on the way down. She stopped in front of him. He looked down at her. She looked up. The storm kept going, loud and indifferent and enormous, the way the world always is when two people are standing, in the specific gravity of something impossible that somehow happened anyway. She didn't speak. He didn't speak. She reached up and set one hand against the side of his jaw. Not forgiving. Not yet. Not claiming. Just present. And she closed the distance. He kissed her back with a quietness that had nothing in it of the man who had grabbed her by the throat. Nothing of the man who had blocked her documents. Something new. Something learning, for the first time, how to be careful with a thing it had almost destroyed. The rain kept falling. The harbor lights blurred in the water below. Somewhere, out in the dark, a ship was making its way through without a visible horizon, guided by memory and instruments and the kind of knowledge that doesn't need the sky to be clear to function. She stepped back. She looked at him one more moment. Then she picked up her bag. She turned. She walked, without hurrying, without looking back, through the corridor, toward the transport, toward the airport, toward the long flight home. Behind her, she knew he was still standing there. She knew because she knew him now. He would stay until she was gone. Not to watch her leave, but because standing in the aftermath of something was the only honest place he had left to stand. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for new stories every week, and leave a comment. Tell me which moment hit you the hardest. I read every single one. Until next time.